Rada, is there anything else that we can make sure? I'll take some pictures and I'll help with the microphone. Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Yeah.
Then I assume we'll have a recording afterwards. Take our seats. We can still wait.
Or until 35, maybe, just to
You didn't happen to bring a copy of the questions, did you?
I have my own copy. I cannot share it.
I'll use your answer.
Hi, welcome everyone to Friday Night AI. My name is Tyler. I'll be the host this evening. I'd like to ask that everyone either silent or turn off your cell phones, please. And if anyone would like the assistance of a hearing assistance device, we have a few available, so just let me know if that's something you'd appreciate. Also, the restrooms are located just back the way you came in, down this hall to your right. This is a recurring event, so we've had a few of these in the past, and we'll have another Friday Night AI coming up near the end of November, I believe. For any other events that you're interested in attending, you can check out our website, aadl.org/events. So tonight we have Friday Night AI, and please help me welcome our three-professor panel here. We have Professor Radha Mihalcha, Professor Zhu Wang, and Professor Perry Sampson. So please give them a round of applause. Thanks.
All right. Is this? Yeah, it is on. I can hear myself. Well, welcome to Friday Night AI, and thank you for the introduction. We are very pleased to have you join us tonight. It is the first time after 2 years to be back in person. We started Friday Night AI about 3 years ago. We had about 1 year of in-person events, and then we switched to fully virtual for another 2 years. And so I'm excited to be back in person, or really be back hybrid. The event is also transmitted on YouTube live, and so there are people also joining us virtually. My name is Radha Mihalcha. I'm a professor of computer science at University of Michigan. I'm also the director of the AI lab. And I'm very happy to be here for this event. This series is really an attempt to engage with the community, that meaning you. I think it's particularly important for artificial intelligence, given that there is so much hype and also so much misinterpretation of what AI can and cannot do. So having the opportunity to engage in a conversation with the community, it's important both ways. For us to understand the kind of questions that people have, and then for everyone to have an opportunity to ask their questions. So tonight we have a discussion on AI and education, which is very timely. The school year has just started, and as it turns out, school can sometimes become stressful for students because of all of the materials they have to cover and assignments, exams, how they prepare, and so forth. Likewise, instructors also have a lot to juggle. So it's preparing instruction, whether it's in person or virtual, preparing testing material, administering those tests, interactions with students, maybe personalization, and so forth. So the question that we are addressing tonight is whether AI can help students and instructors alike in education, in their quest to learn more or to help others learn. So tonight we will look at how such AI systems work, what are some of their limitations, how AI can be used to assist students or educators, what are some perspectives on future developments. I'm joined by two experts in this space, Professor Wang and Professor Sampson. Wang is an assistant professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at University of Michigan. And in her research, she develops computational methods and systems to support scalable teaching and learning. One of her research goals is to empower instructors and educators to create effective learning experiences more easily. She builds in her research teacher support systems and learning at scale systems using human AI collaborative approaches. We also have here Professor Sampson. He is a professor in the Department of Climate and Space Sciences and Engineering. He was the recipient of the 2021 University of Michigan Distinguished Innovator Award as a co-founder of Weather Underground. Probably you have used that to check the weather and other information around that. And he also built two educational technologies, lecture tools and learning clues, which use AI to automatically generate study resources for students based on what was discussed in class. Before we get started, just a few logistics. The plan for tonight is for the first 30 minutes or so. Professor Sampson and Professor Wang will address different aspects of the use of AI in education. And then for the second half, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions. You can do that live by simply raising your hand, and somebody will hand you the microphone so you can ask here. Or if you are joining us online via YouTube, then you can type your question in the comments, and I will check. So I'll look for any comments, questions that are online. So with that, we can get started. I would like to thank the Ann Arbor District Library for hosting us tonight. It's a collaboration between the library and Michigan AI. All right, so on to the first question. I did introduce our panelists, but I would like to ask them to introduce themselves, and especially to talk about how they got to be interested in AI in education. What was your career path and what excites you about AI in education? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can get started. So I got interested in developing educational technologies when I was an undergrad student. When I worked on my undergraduate thesis, we developed an AR toolkit to help middle school kids learn chemistry. So there were these microstructures in chemistry molecules that is very hard for students to know, like physically, like how these molecules were composed. So we developed an AR toolkit where kids can actually show these QR codes in front of a camera, and then they would see these atoms like hydrogen and oxygen atoms, and they can compose them into like a water molecule. So it's a better way for them to understand these microstructures in chemistry. And then we did a study in a middle school in South China, where we gave students these tools and have them play around with these toolkits. And some kids just came to me after the class saying they hadn't thought learning could be so much fun. And I thought, oh, this is such a rewarding process to develop technology to help children learn. And that got me into this field, developing technologies to support education. And but that was my only experience in K-12 context. Starting from my PhD, my research has been mostly focused in higher education context. So at the beginning of my PhD, that was the year when MOOC was like a big thing. Like in 2013, we got lots of data from these large online courses, but we do not have enough like analytical methods to analyze such data. So I worked on some projects to analyze like forum data for MOOCs to see how we can support students know each other better and collaborate on these MOOCs. That was like for a couple years. And later on, I actually became a TA, like a teaching assistant myself for some courses, and I teach my own classes. And then I realized, there are so many things that, so many challenges instructors face themselves during teaching. For example, students turn in open-ended work, which is very low quality. Like they may spend like 10 to 15 hours on this work, but they don't get any feedback. And then they turn them in, it's bad quality. Then they do not have opportunities to repeatedly practice these skills because feedback was often given to them maybe like 2 weeks later, and then they do not have the extra opportunity. And also when I'm giving feedback to students, I realize, I'm giving the same piece of feedback to a lot of the students. I'm just copy and pasting my feedback. So I'm thinking, whether there could be better ways to help instructors create scaffolding or practice opportunities for students beforehand, before they engage in large complex assignments, or whether there are ways to help instructors provide quality feedback to students early on and more frequently. So that drives my current research to develop instructor support tools to help instructors design quality learning experiences and help provide feedback more easily, which can in turn help students learn.
Are there any teachers in the room? Then I have to be careful. I got into this field of AI and making technology for the classroom out of necessity, or fear, perhaps. I've been teaching, this is my 45th year as faculty at the University of Michigan. And, catching your breath, I know, it's been a long time. And over that time, my research is on air pollution modeling and extreme weather. And one of the courses I teach is an introductory course called Extreme Weather and Climate. How is climate going to change extreme weather events in the future? And in teaching that course, I realized I needed help. And so in the early days and after I got tenure, I decided to get into how could I improve the quality of this course. And one way was I just wanted to be able to pull up current weather and talk about it in class, but that wasn't available. There was no internet yet. This is at a time before NSFNet even. It was just a string on the wall pretty much and a couple cans. But we created a system that would allow us to pull up the current weather so I could look smart for my 9 o'clock class. And that was a telnet session, and that evolved over time into something called a Gopher client, which evolved into time to something that became HTML and the web, and became what's known today as the Weather Underground. Starting literally just so I could look smart for my students, and it gets some 17 million visitors a day now. So that's the kind of thing that was I just wanted to try to fill a need in class. And then they tried using clickers in class as a way. Have you ever used those where someone asks questions and you can respond with this handheld device? But I wanted to ask more types of questions, like here's a weather map. Where do you expect the temperatures to be higher tomorrow and why? And so I built a system that allowed that. And then the students came and said, look, if we're going to bring a laptop to class, an iPad to class, how about if we could also do this or that or the other things? We just started adding it based on what the students wanted. And that led to the formation of another group called Lecture Tools, which has also evolved now to a company called Echo 360 and has some 2 million users worldwide. And now I'm starting another group which basically listens to what's said during class and uses artificial intelligence to figure out what was actually important in this thing. See the students in the room are going, yeah, that sounds good. And the idea being that if we can index what's being talked about in class, what's being visually presented in class, that we could allow the students to search for the specific moments when it was talked about in the videos, and or automatically generate study guides based on what was said in class. And that's, I think, why I was invited here today, is to talk about that evolution. But I think for all of us, probably this area of education is something we do. We have our research, but we do teach, and we don't want to teach poorly. So part of my motivation was simply to try to improve the quality of what I provide.
Well, thank you. And I think this is one of the unique areas where we are experts in what we build. So for instance, I work in computational social science. I don't think I'm an expert in social science, so I reach out to social scientists. But then in education, both your stories talk about how you ran into a situation and you needed that help. So you say, well, maybe I can build something for that. So I think it's a unique interaction between research and teaching. So we are grateful to you and everyone else who works in this space for getting help, like for my own classes when I teach. And you talk both about helping students, helping instructors, and obviously we are sort of in it together. But if we could focus now for a moment on what are some opportunities for students. So what kind of opportunities are for AI to provide support for students? And it can be in various situations, whether it's during lecture, whether it's for assignments, whether it's for self-study or other settings. You want to start?
I'll start this time. All right. For the students, first of all, I've been at Michigan this long because the students are amazing. And my job as faculty is literally to throw half-baked ideas and throw them out there, and then students pick them up and generally politely tell me that was a dumb idea, or then maybe I can make something of it, and they evolve these things. So working in this very fertile environment, it's been a great fun, actually, to try to think about building new technologies. Right now, for example, I have a team of about 12 students, and we're opening up next week to a larger team now. The idea being that this could become a capstone course, that students can get involved in creating the technologies that would use for their classrooms, and it would be done by the time they graduate, though. Because the whole idea is just to provide a petri dish for students to get involved in developing what's next in education. And this is my last semester teaching after all these years, but I'm going to spend the next 3 years working with these teams to try to evolve more ideas for what students could do. So on one hand, I'm using the students to help build what's next. I would like to believe it's helping students as well, because these students are involved because they want to help their colleagues. They want to think of ways to make better systems than we have now. Later, perhaps, I'll talk about some of the pitfalls and things limiting that work, but that's the general idea, is students making products, students making ideas that would help other students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in terms of building these student support systems, I think one really important thing is for AI to do is to give more frequent feedback to students. So think of like several successful educational applications. For example, Duolingo. I think Duolingo is very successful because whenever you they have lots of exercises, and then you get immediate feedback on a lot of these, and you get repeated practice opportunities on a lot of these. And other successful platforms such as Code Academy, similarly, like when you enter a piece of code, you also get immediate error messages and feedback to improve your code. I think getting these frequent feedback and also repeated practice opportunities is essential for students to practice the skills and learn. But in a lot of the domains, for example, in the courses I teach, it's hard to give students such deliberate practice opportunities, and feedback is often delayed. So I think it would be really important for AI to be able to generate this feedback to students. So one line of very successful work in the space is intelligent tutoring systems. So what it does is that it would first build a cognitive model of the space. And I think it's the earliest way of using AI, like rule-based AI. It's not anything fancy as we have seen now, but it built out the rules. For example, in order to solve this problem correctly, you have to follow these rules and these steps. And then there are also some rules that are buggy, like students often have easy mistakes. And then the system would be able to give students targeted feedback if they show those positive rules. But if they show those baggy rules, the system would tell them, okay, this is wrong. Instead, you should do something else. Early on, there were a lot of these rule-based AI, like intelligent tutoring system built in like for domains such as math and algebra. But of course, they take a lot of time to build because you need to figure out all of the possible solution paths. I think recently people are exploring like more advanced techniques using also leveraging the recent advances in AI to see how we can automatically generate these intelligent tutoring systems. I think one challenge in the domain is that if we are relying on AI completely, then the quality would be a concern. So I think exploring human AI collaborative approaches, for example, if we use AI to generate some of these feedback or these practice opportunities, but also allow instructors or experts to do some quality control in the end, would be able to produce, might be a middle ground there to increase both the scalability and also the quality.
And you mentioned Duolingo, so that will be for learning languages. Mm-hmm. Are there certain domains that benefit more from such tools? And there is, of course, also the sciences, physics, chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think so. Language learning. So for Duolingo, because it's for language learner, it's mostly facts. Like for example, I have to remember these vocabularies. That would benefit more from repeated practice, like repetition and recall. But for other domains, that, like for example, if you're learning more complex tasks, like to be able to write a program, maybe simply recalling isn't sufficient, but still having more practice opportunities for them to apply this skill would help them master this. One general rule, this is not like, one general rule is that students, they need about 10 practice opportunities to master a skill. So if we give them 10 practice opportunities and they receive feedback on these, they would, we can expect them to be able to master the skill afterwards.
I was also thinking with respect to the complexity of a subject. So language, as you said, there is a vocabulary, there might be some grammar rules that you have to learn. But then say if we think of advanced algebra or maybe chemistry, like again, an advanced topic, how easy it is for a system to provide feedback, like to understand what the student is saying and provide feedback.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there is this difference between more well-defined domains and less well-defined domains. For well-defined domains, even for complex tasks, there are some methods to, let's say, break down a complex task into smaller chunks. For example, in order to write an algorithm that does sorting, maybe I need to have these like 5 components in it. And then we can give students practice on each of these components before we give them this integrated problem to solve. These would be for more well-defined domains. But for ill-defined domains, I think it's very hard to even break it down into these smaller chunks. So it requires, I think, more work in more work in the domain itself to see what would experts agree on, like what makes a person an expert in this domain.
Okay, I see. So speaking of experts, how about instructors? What are opportunities for AI to help instructors?
I'm still caught on the last question. I'm old enough to remember that I used to do all my math in my head. And then the pocket calculator came along, and nowadays I won't trust myself anymore. I always go to Excel or something just to make sure my math is right. And the same thing is happening now. Every time I write something, an email, it's correcting my English for me. So there's no motivation or reward for learning good spelling because the system will do it for me. Are we through AI making ourselves weaker?
That's a great question. I've actually been thinking about that too. So one thing,
You have to come closer.
one example was when I was talking to my advisor during grad school. He said when they were attending middle school, they were learning this how to divide, how to do the opposite of squaring of a number. But we never teach that now because you can easily do it through a computer. And also right now, sometimes it feels you do not need to remember any of the facts because you can just easily Google it. It's probably easier if you Google it than you actually remember it in your head or like save it somewhere in your notebook. I'm thinking it might be the case where, for example, with the development of AI, the things we need to learn also is changing. And it may free up our space to do maybe more creative things. And then for the mere facts, we can just rely on like our extended brain, which could be Google.
I hope
It
that's
is.
true.
I was thinking larger scale, and I don't know to what extent it applies, but it used to be that you would actually go in the field, get a certain plant, I don't know the name in English, to make the fabric and then do the clothing. Now we go to the store and we have no idea how to do that clothing, let alone how to do the fabric. So it's like Shu said, I think it's making room for doing more creative things. Now at some point, when will the brain become lazy enough that and will not know enough basics to do the creative stuff? So if you don't know how to do math, I don't know if we are ready for the more advanced things that are math related, but it's an interesting point.
I think that's the overarching question here is at what point, and this maybe there's nobody old enough to know this joke, but it's like the prunes commercial is one too many or one too few is three too many. Is AI and that benefit that is that we're able to do, we don't have to worry about those tasks like memorizing how to square things or square root things, and that frees us to think deeper, or do we just become lazy, or because the system takes care of it all? And that's the challenge we have going forward as we build these things.
And I think sometimes laziness also drives innovations. Like, for example, the remote for TV is developed because people get lazier and lazier.
But I guess Perry is asking whether that innovation is good. I mean, do we really want that remote? Maybe we'll be better off actually getting up and pressing buttons on the TV and do some movement on the way. So it's also the reverse question. But it's true that laziness does drive some innovation. So if we talk a little bit about the instructors and how instructors use AI, can you share some of the things that are out there, whether in the works? I know, Perry, you mentioned some of the things you work. I know, Shu, you work on things that help instructors.
One of the areas I use AI is it was because students wanted this ability to ask questions of me. Now, I've been teaching a long time, and over those years, I'd always go, any questions? And that's more or less the response I always get is quiet. In fact, over the years, I would have maybe a dozen verbal questions of a class of 200 students, which was fine with me. I just assumed I had so nailed the lectures that people understood everything, and I just throw the chalk on the ground and do the little victory dance. I'll explain what chalk is later for the young people. But there's this idea that no questions were coming back. So I added, the students wanted to be able to ask questions digitally. And we set up a system called a back channel so students could pose questions. My teaching assistant would sit in class and answer questions as class is going on in these large lecture halls. And lo and behold, now I've been doing this for several years, in the last 3 or 4 years at least, I've been averaging over 500 questions a semester, which is so sobering to appreciate that all these years I've been confusing and didn't know it. But the students love this because they can ask the question. My poor teaching assistant answers these questions, basically doing spin control on what Perry's saying. And all the students then see the questions and the answers, but they don't see who asked the question. I know who did, and my teaching assistant knows who did. But the point is that they have a way to test the system, and we've got an NSF grant right now studying this. Which is watching how does that change the student's sense of belongingness? Because there's these large sea of students, and you walk into that classroom and you aren't like the other students. You are maybe in a science class, you're a woman, a student of color, a first-generation student, a student who doesn't speak English as your first language. And you suddenly don't feel like maybe you belong in this class or this discipline. But if you could start posing questions in this fairly safe way, does that change your attitudes about whether you belong in that discipline? So in that way, I believe that the technology is in fact helping me as an instructor be a better instructor, because students are able to pose questions when they have them during class and not just wait till office hours, but ask the question then so they can get a response so they can follow the rest of the lecture. Those are small steps, and I go on my soapbox and argue to my colleagues that every class at Michigan, especially at the first introductory level, should have a back channel. If I walked in as a scientist into an English literature class, I'm lost, and I've done that. And the capacity to pose a question where I could catch up to the other students would be extremely helpful. I think that should be mandatory.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I agree that it would be super important to increase the belongingness of the students. One question for Perry is, do you think not only for, let's say, classes and lectures, let's say for small group discussions or meetings, do you think it's helpful to give them some back channels as well?
It's my assumption that when you get into the smaller classes, by then hopefully you would have built up your confidence to be able to participate. But I suspect that there are still students who are just uncomfortable. I mean, I came from Appalachia in a small town in upstate New York and went to school with students from Long Island and New York, and they all seemed so more grown up than me. I just felt intimidated and didn't do well in school at first. And I fear that there are students like that who still haven't gotten their confidence. And so at what point do you pull the umbilical cord off and let them now ask their verbal questions? But I think that at least in those first years, they need the opportunity to grow that confidence.
Yep. And I think especially for international students, I think that would be very useful and helpful for them.
Sure, do you want to add anything on help for the instructors from the AI?
Yeah, so one of my ongoing projects we're working on now is to help instructors design quiz questions. So we know from a lot of research that active learning is more helpful than passive learning. Active learning meaning that giving students more chances to ask questions, work on problem sets, and talk with each other. But still, passive lecturing is a dominant teaching method in a lot of STEM classes. And one of the reasons that it's very hard for instructors to come up with a lot of these problem sets that are high quality and aligned with their educational goals. So there are NLP-based automatic question generation techniques, but they often only produce low-quality questions and do not align with the instructor's goals. So we are developing a human NLP collaborative system where we have this NLP toolbox, which we enable the instructors to select text and apply certain NLP models such as paraphrase, summarization, negation, to generate question options and distractors. We employ the NLP tools in a way that instructors, they can decide on the input of these models, and they can modify the outcome of the models, and they can completely ignore the NLP support if they think the NLP just provide not very good suggestions. So I think we did a study with instructors, and they felt that this human AI teaming approach was very helpful for them to get some inspirations from AI, but also help them design quality questions quicker. So that is one area we are focusing on now to help instructors design questions. Some other ways I imagine AI could help instructors is, I know that one colleague from CMU, he worked on a project where he had, so in a middle school classroom, students, let's say, were working on problem sets on their computers, and then they present the students' answer results through a dashboard to the teacher. And then the teacher would know which students are thriving and which students are having trouble. So then the teacher can spend more time with the students who are in need of help. So I think it's also a way to do some sort of human AI complementary tutoring. So the AI would help provide these analytics to the teachers, and the teachers are aware in real time which students are in trouble, and then they can spend more time with those students. I think that's a very good way of using AI in classrooms.
And that's very cool. I'm curious if you are using, like both of you, if you are using the tools that you are building in your own classes.
Oh, yeah. If I go to the trouble of building it, darn sure I'm going to use it in my class. Absolutely. And to go back on what you were just talking about, one of the other tools is like clickers, but again, that system where I can pose questions to students. I usually ask 4 or 5 questions a day just to see if they understand the concepts we're talking about. And the best thing I can do is go back and see, well, which students are systematically getting those questions wrong, because those students systematically do poorly on exams. So it becomes obvious who those students are. And I've tried to reach out to those students with mixed success. I know then who's likely to do poorly in my exams, and even reaching out to them, they still are determined to do poorly in my tests. They don't seem to, despite my warnings, etc., don't seem to raise themselves up. So there's more to the problem.
I like one of your earlier stories on having coffee, which seems to have helped the most, like having coffee with some of your students.
Oh, yeah, no, that is true. A good point. I've forgotten that. But so I can see who's not answering the questions right. And another thing I always do in each class is I ask at the beginning of each class, how are you feeling? I give them a graph. The x-axis is how you're feeling physically. The y-axis is how you're feeling emotionally. And they put a dot on this graph, and every day I record that. And in my system, I know who put which dot where. So I am able to mine that. And if I'm watching for students who are maybe systematically having some emotional issues, and I've asked them in the past, what would you expect me to do with that information? Would you expect me to let your advisor know? Absolutely not. Would you expect me to let your parents know? Are you crazy? And I go down the list. I mean, do you want to know what resources are available on campus? I said, yeah, fine. And I went down the list, and the one thing they wanted was coffee. They wanted to have me sit down with them so they could explain the situation they're having. So I drink a lot of coffee, and I'll meet with students, and which is my job, right, to be helpful. So if I know that there's something going on, I can at least sit down with them. I cannot help them probably, but I can listen. And sometimes that's the best thing you can do.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story one of my colleagues he told when he was running studies in K-12 classrooms. One thing he found was, so students were not doing very well on these problem sets. And then when a teacher comes to the shoulder of the student and say, you will get it, you will do very well. And then the student just magically improve their performance afterwards. So I think sometimes there are these things that are more emotional that cannot be achieved by AI, but they have to be done by the instructors, like by people who they respect. But maybe AI can help better allocate resources, like help the teachers know who are most in need of help, and then they can spend more of these time with those students.
There's probably everybody in this room, I'm guessing, can think of one person at the moment who really influenced where you are today. It's being recognized by somebody who takes the time and just acknowledges you're there, and maybe they're helpful, maybe they just listen. But that's probably one of the most powerful things we can do, and that's hard to do at a university with 200 students in your class. So that is a place where perhaps AI can help us identify how to use our resources to be helpful.
And before we move on to the next question, there is a question online which relates to something that you said, very concretely asking whether there is a tool for gathering questions, for that back channel for students to ask questions, and if there is such a tool, what's the name of that?
There are several tools, and in fact, we're in the process of evaluating them now. The one I was using was from a company called Echo 360, but there are several others. And if that person would email me, I would be pleased to share that my email is Sampson, S-A-M-S-O-N, @umich.edu. Just email me. I'll be happy to share with you what we're learning about these tools and my recommendations.
All right. So, Shu, what you mentioned about maybe AI helping with students who are more in need, it's a great segue with what I was going to ask next about personalization. So different students, and Perry, you mentioned that as well, different students have different needs, are at a different level. We keep talking about how important it is to do personalization, and yet, at least in Michigan, we have these classes of 200, 300 students, so sort of forget about personalization with classes growing so large. But there is probably an opportunity for AI to do that kind of personalization. Can you talk a little bit about whether your experience or your thoughts about personalization using AI?
So I think intelligent tutoring systems were some of the successful systems in the personalization towards the personalization goal, because it can give students targeted feedback based on their mistakes they displayed through the interface. But as I mentioned, there were some challenges in authoring these intelligent tutoring systems, especially based on rule-based AI. So in my own experience, I think personalization is important. But I feel like even before personalization, I think at the very beginning, a lot of students, a lot of novices, they share similar struggles, and they have similar misconceptions, and they have similar mistakes that they would demonstrate. So I feel like instead of trying to personalize at the very beginning, I think to provide more scaffolding activities, even if it's not personalized, just to provide them with more problem sets and more practice opportunities and more feedback, even if it's the feedback is the same across all students, I think those would still help beginners and novices improve a lot. And I think afterwards, maybe more personalization approaches would be more beneficial.
You know, if you think about personalization, I always think about Amazon and the gift that they have. I swear to God, if I think about a rake, the next day I'm being offered 3 rakes online. Somehow it knows through this process what it is I'm thinking of. And in education, I would like to believe there's good there, but it worries me some about what information should we be collecting about students. Of course, we're education, so we're the good guys, right? But we're going to collect a lot of information about what students are doing. Where's the border at which we're overstepping our bounds and offering help that might be unwelcome? I don't have a good answer for personalization. In my own case, we know in our system, we know what's being said during class, so we're offering to the student, here are the words and phrases we think you should know to be ready for the exam. And we're also measuring then of the things that we offered, which ones did you spend most time on, which ones did you find most useful, which feeds back into our system. They become smarter over time, so for future students, it might be able to offer better advice. That's the idea, but we do know also that different students might find different resources. So that means I probably need to know something about the student's history to know what to offer to each student. And technically we can do that. I'm just wondering at what point I'm knowing too much.
And since you mentioned that, what is currently being done? So there are tools that in fact access student records. I mean, obviously the university has those student records or a school has the student records, but in order to train some systems, sometimes there is access to that. What is the current practice for protecting that kind of privacy?
For example, if I was going to go model, and I model the atmospheres, if I was going to model student success in my class, I need one number, and just one number. What's their GPA coming into the course? It's a linear relationship. If you've done poorly in the past, you're probably going to do poorly in my course. And it's my job to try to destroy that relationship, but it exists and has continued for years. Tim McKay has shown this over and over here on campus. So that would mean, but if I knew the student's GPA at the beginning of the semester, I could save a lot of time and just do grading week one. The point is, I shouldn't know that at the beginning of the semester. And after the semester, we can do our post-analysis so that we would know that this student is likely to do poorly in my course. But should I, as an instructor, know that? Because it could well bias my approach to how I teach that student.
Yeah, in terms of data collection, I think it's important to let the students know what data is being collected for research. So for my research projects, we would have these sort of opt-out IRBs, and then we would we would let the students know, okay, in these classes, these data, for example, your midterm and final exam responses and grades were collected. But the instructors would identify these before they share with the researchers. And people who do not want to get their data shared, they would fill out an opt-out form, and then their data would not be shared. I think having this type of transparency in terms of what data is being collected and how the data would be used by other researchers at the point of data collection is important.
I agree, and I think it's also a matter of setting up the right expectations, students knowing what is being collected on them, and the same, I guess, would go on instructors, right? We are recorded during our lectures, so being transparent about the data being collected. So we're at the point where we can take questions. We did take one before. We have a couple of questions online. If people here in the room have questions, you can just raise your hand, and Sumit here will come with the microphone to you. And while we are thinking of,
We have a question here.
Hello. I mean, like, I see the part is where teaching using AI system help us in terms of the instructor, but always I ask question about how can we address different learning styles. I mean, like, people learn in different paths. Like, I'm not a learning scientist or something, but I can see that everybody cannot learn in the same way one learn. So what can we do in that term always? Like, how can we address different kind of learning styles for people who have different abilities to learn? That's my question.
There is a project on campus called Gradecraft, which kind of gets at this, and I do a little bit of this in my own class, where I set up the various ways that students can be assessed. My daughter, I have a daughter who is smart, but she froze on exams. And so we've made it so that there are a variety of different ways that you can weight your grade. And before you take the first exam, you can choose then what percentage of your grade is going to be for the writing assignments versus what percent is going to be for exams versus what percent is for other things. And it's not that I'm using AI in that case to predict what would be good for you. I'm forcing you to think about what you think would be good for you. It's arguably more important that you learn what your learning style is. And so turn it into an experiment where you have to choose at the beginning of the semester what you think would be the best way to express your understanding of the material. And students respond very positively to that. Most of them choose the lowest possible percent for the exams and higher percents for other things. But again, I think it's especially in these introductory courses, useful for students to think about not only what the science we're teaching, but how do you learn best?
So there is also a question online, whether you worry about robots coming along and taking your or our jobs anytime soon.
I've got an opening.
Yeah, I don't think it's likely that. I think what a lot of the research in the space are looking into how AI can assist teachers, how AI can team up with instructors to make to create better learning experiences and help students in a more efficient way. But I don't think like AI as if it's developed now can like fully replace teachers, because for example we have. Like instructors, they have these educational goals, and they also have some ideas about students' common misconceptions, students' mistakes, and then they also have like, for example, more information about the curriculum and how this course fits into the bigger picture, and they have like expertise, like domain-specific expertise. For AI models, they are often trained on like specific data sets where these information that are in the instructor's head were not considered when training these AI models. So I think oftentimes what AI can do alone do not align with the instructor's educational goals immediately. So I think what would be a promising approach is that AI can provide suggestions while instructors still need to make the final judgment and decision on how things should look like in the end. It's like autonomous driving. So if you think about it, you could have let's say on like a very straight road and very easy road conditions, maybe we can have the autonomous driving on, but still the driver would be paying attention and monitoring the process. But in very like in edge cases, in cases where, for example, the lighting condition is bad or on like very unique road conditions, then still the driver need to take away and make sure it's safe.
Yeah, I would agree, but I'm curious, Perry, what you think?
I have mixed emotions on this. I mean, there are some, we are recording this, so I'll be careful. There are some people teaching who could be robots. They may be now, best I can tell. They teach this very didactic way, and they probably give the same lectures every year, so they could be just recorded and turned on in the front of the room. But on the other hand, I think robots would make for lousy coffee partners. And I want to go back to what I said before. If my job includes more having coffee with students, it is having more one-on-one sessions with students and hearing their issues, what problems they're having with their work or otherwise, then no, they're not going to replace us. That's the role we should be focused on. But if it's just the rote delivery of material, that a lot of that, and that's what online courses are offering, is this recorded material that you can listen to at your leisure. But it's more the time you spend, the one-on-one time for your own personal questions. That's the job that we have to focus on. That keeps our job secure, I think.
So teachers who drink coffee will not lose their job, I guess. Other questions?
Hello. So this question, I guess, is just in general, but I guess for when Professor Wang was talking about the NLP models that are sort of automating these general questions that aren't considered good, I was just wondering, like, how could we, maybe using the existing tools we have within NLP, like potentially make those better or find a metric to, like, how are we assessing them? Because I know for like just like if I'm trying to master piano, right? There's like this 10,000 hour rule, or like if you just do it for a really long time. So I was wondering if maybe for these models, if like after a certain point, after it has enough data, it's considered good, or like, yeah, I was just wondering how that's measured.
Yeah, I think totally. If there are implications for like how can we improve these models. For example, we can currently a lot of these automatic question generation models are trained on like, for example, Wikipedia articles. Then they do not apply to like a more general educational domain. So we can include more diverse training data sets into these models. In our recent study, we actually compared these two approaches. One is we have our system where it's a human AI teaming approach. Instructors, they get to select the input for these models, and then they decide whether they want to take the NLP suggestions, and they can directly modify the NLP outcomes afterwards. And in a control condition, we give them automatically generated questions, and then they can also edit these questions through an interface. So it's not like they would, so they can make whatever edits they want for these auto-generated questions. So instructors, they prefer the human AI teaming approach because they found that when they need to modify some AI-generated questions, they have to think about where these options or where these content are coming from, and then they have to think about, okay, does it work here, does it not work here? So it seems it's extra workload for them if they have to rectify too much about things. But if they can decide immediately on the input of the models, that would become easier. Maybe one thing to improve this automated approach is to see how we can learn humans' behavior in terms of selecting input, and then train these models to also simulate these behaviors of selecting input.
I just want to throw in for the AI challenge, NLP is natural language processing. It's the technique of listening to sentences and making sense of it by a computer, in case you didn't know.
Oh yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that.
Perry, you mentioned earlier that by using AI, we may make ourselves weaker. And there is a question online which asks if you know of any studies that were done on human brain, and I'm adding or otherwise, that would relate to this. Like, how is the use of AI systems changing us?
Did I mention I'm a meteorologist? So I have no idea about that topic. I'm hoping, well, you would though. Yeah.
I actually don't know specifically about AI systems. I think there are other studies about other like human behavior and how it changes us, like the use of mobile devices, but I don't know about AI in particular, and I think that's very interesting. We might need a little bit more time. Maybe we don't change that quickly, so we might need more evolution to see.
That's a great question, though, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is. So we'll come back here in some years and report back with the answer. So I'll take just one more question from online, which I think it's important because it speaks about privacy. And the question is, when it comes to data collection, what do you think about the settings that should be available to students? Should there be a default opt-out, so there is no data collection and you sort of have to opt in, or the other way, where it's sort of the default is opt-in and you have to do some paperwork to opt out? Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts and maybe trade-offs between the two?
Mm-hmm.
I have strong opinions on that. The thing that I'm doing is listening to what's being said in class and helping the students find material that was made available to them. In my mind, in that case, that it should be the instructors shouldn't even be involved, in my opinion, because the instructors already said, I'm going to have my course be recorded. And this system we're building just makes it easier for the students to find the things that the instructor has made available. Therefore, the instructor could opt out for reasons I don't understand, but maybe this, they just feel like their lectures are so, I don't know why. It makes no sense to me. But having said that, I put hard guardrails on this so that only the people who have access to what was talked about in class are the students in that class and the instructor. I've been asked about, well, could the chair of the department see what's being talked about in all the classes in their department? Yeah, but it's already getting into a place where I'm uncomfortable, because you can see in the news that there are politicians who are out there thinking that they could dictate then what we should and shouldn't be teaching in our classrooms. And can they reach into my system then and find the instructors who are talking about a topic that they find unpopular? That makes me very squeamish, so I want to make sure there's really hard guardrails on the system that will keep the privacy of what goes on in the classroom to those who should have access to that classroom. Expansion beyond that is a slippery slope.
All right, so we reached time. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our panelists, Perry and Shu. Also, thank you to Sumit for helping out, and also Aura. Aura Bunescu. She's been helping to set up the event from behind the scenes. And of course to Tyler and Max in the back, and Ann Arbor District Library for hosting us. And we look forward to seeing you in November. Did you want to say some final words? Or...
Round of applause, please, for our panelists. Yeah, and I just want to thank U of M for sending out these 3 wonderful professors. And thank you all for coming. Hope you have a nice weekend.